This is History Myths and Myth-Conceptions, and today's myth is Roman Salute. This is a very famous myth, but you cannot avoid pointing it out, just like you cannot skip the myth of 300 Spartans or the last words of Julius Caesar.
Ave-moi.
The Roman salute, as you all know, is a form of greeting where you extend your right hand with your palm down. This form of greeting is now banned in many countries around the world because it is strongly associated with fascism and Nazism. It is believed that in the early 20th century, Italian fascists gave a second life to this gesture, which long ago was widely used in ancient Rome. Moreover, you can see this gesture in a huge number of pseudo-historical movies about Rome. Filmmakers are absolutely convinced that this is how Romans greeted each other, especially in formal circumstances. In short, this is just complete nonsense, and we have no reliable evidence that the so-called Roman salute was ever used in ancient Rome. You can, of course, look at some examples of visual art, like statues. Some of them have a raised hand. But sometimes a raised hand is just a raised hand. I wave at my neighbors on a fairly regular basis, and believe me, it bears little resemblance to a Roman salute. People just wave at each other sometimes. How this idea of the Roman salute came about is an interesting question, but usually the answer boils down to just a couple of options. The first one is, this gesture in one form or another, maybe, possibly, theoretically, was used in the Roman legions. This is mostly a speculation, there is no reliable evidence, as already mentioned. The second option tells us that we're dealing with a made-up tradition that came out of nowhere under rather comical circumstances. It is this option, out of nowhere and under comical circumstances, that is usually considered the most probable of two. The history of this phenomenon sounds like somebody's bad joke. It is generally believed that the idea of the Roman salute was borrowed from the 1785 painting called The Oath of the Horatii by Jacques-Louis David. The painting depicts a scene from an ancient Roman myth, or from the legendary history of Rome, if you think that this kind of wording is more preferable. Why did Jacques-Louis David decide to depict the characters with outstretched arms? We do not know. We can assume that the artist was familiar with the work of Dionysius of Halicarnassus, where this legend is told, well, apart from Livy. And the father of these Horatii brothers actually uses his hands. Let's just put it this way. Here's the quote. Their father, upon learning their disposition, rejoiced exceedingly, and lifting his hands to heaven, said he rendered thanks to the gods for having given him noble sons. So yes, he stretches his hands to the sky, because Greeks and Romans sometimes did this, establishing a direct telephone connection with the deities. It is quite possible that the artist saw this line in the text and then invented the gesture which you now can see on your screen. For more than 100 years, no one cared much about this gesture, until it was borrowed for the movie Cabiria by screenwriter Gabriele D'Annunzio. It should be noted here that Cabiria, released in 1914, is quite a milestone in the history of cinema. It is generally considered to be the progenitor of the peplum genre, or the sword and sandal genre, if you will. You can easily watch it in its entirety on YouTube or wherever, because obviously it is currently in the public domain. So it was Cabiria and Gabriele D'Annunzio personally who popularized the gesture. D'Annunzio was not just an important Italian writer, cultural figure, and high-ranking Freemason. He was also a politician. In 1919, he led a large detachment of Italian irredentists into the city of Fiume formerly part of the Habsburg monarchy, and proclaimed there a brand new state, the Italian Regency of Carnaro. The state existed in this form for only a year and was then gradually incorporated into Italy. After World War II, Fiume became part of Yugoslavia. The city is now called Rijeka and is located in present-day Croatia. The extremely intriguing history of Fiume is obviously not within the scope of this video. What interests us right now is that Gabriele D'Annunzio introduced this Roman salute from the movie as an official greeting in his new mini-state. Later, it was copied by Benito Mussolini, after which it became extremely popular with the fascist parties around the world. A little later, the National Socialist German Workers' Party also copied it. They were not fascists, but they followed trends and were friends with Mussolini.
Captain Klenzendorf. Heil Hitler.
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 Heil Hitler. You know Freddy Finkel.
Heil Hitler.
Heil Hitler.
Heil Hitler.
Heil Hitler. Heil Hitler.
Heil Hitler.
Heil Hitler.
Heil Hitler.
Heil Hitler.
Heil Hitler.
So, did I miss anything?
Thus, this form of greeting has traveled an interesting path from an old late 18th century painting to modern legislative bans. During the pandemic, Ignazio La Russa, a prominent Italian politician, jokingly suggested on Twitter that people should use the Roman salute as a healthier alternative to a handshake. He had to delete the post because people don't get jokes these days. That said, we can't be sure that Ignazio La Russa was actually joking given his interesting background. What does any of this have to do with ancient Rome? Strictly speaking, nothing. Well, unless you consider Cabiria a documentary.